Hey John, I just wanted to start this off with wearing a hat. Seeing as part of your video you were discussing hats and how you had a certain appeal to hats. Well, I believe that that comes from a natural environment that people promote these hats, and there are reasons for the promotions of these hats, and that these hats are and always have been some type of form of symbolism. Now, this hat that I'm wearing now, at one time in my life, was a one of my favorite hats, and it was a leather scally hat. But some people would wear it on backwards like this, and traditionally, I think more often than not, they wore them like this. You've probably seen a lot of these in Brooklyn. Uh, when I was a young teenager, I wore one of these. I always liked it. I don't know where that original sense of appeal came from. I think it probably came from the old black and white uh, shows that I used to watch, the television shows. Maybe even seen it on the Little Rascals or something like that, and I always thought, hey, that's a cool hat, and I always liked it. And people that I had met out in the world that I admired, those people wore them. So I decided I would wear that kind of hat, and I like that. And then I discovered this kind of hat, that they were available. Now, this kind of hat was hard to find, believe it or not. I found one, and I got myself one when I was a teenager and I was working. And even though in the cowboy movies we would see these kind of hats, but the original one I got was a fedora, which was, as we know from the people, wore them a lot, and like the 1940s and 30s gangster movies. I used to enjoy watching those. And even though it's not a good thing what the people involved in, there was always this level of excitement associated with it, this level of fun. So anyhow, hats. Here's a little information about hats you might not know. Have you ever noticed the? I mean, you had told me that you grew up in the Catholic religion. You notice that really, of course you notice. You know, you know those real tall hats like the Pope wears. You know where those seem to originate from? Check out the god named Baal. 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 That's the kind of hat the god Baal wore. Now, am I insinuating that the Pope thinks he's God Baal? Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. But see, that's the thing about tradition, is when you take an object, such as a hat, and it gets passed down through tradition, the connection of the object and the symbolism easily gets lost. Especially if there's a connection between something, for instance, that somebody's saying is bad or evil. Now, if we look through the scriptures that are in the Bible, it's written pretty much that Baal was bad and evil and people shouldn't have anything involved in it. So, of course, if the people who are wearing these big, tall hats are wearing it symbolic of Baal, they wouldn't want you to know that. But sometimes these people, things have evolved so far, they haven't even a clue to where it came from. But you would think the religious leaders that have more time than anybody else, hey, you know, the higher level you go up in religion, really the less they have to do, the more time they have to hang around and conspire about things that they want to do versus what they really should be doing and could be doing to promote something good and healthy. But unfortunately, that's the way that it is. So you might want to look that up. That's kind of cool. Now, you had mentioned in the end of your video about researching Sikhism, and you're going to bring that as the next subject. I'm up for that. I like learning stuff new. I guess I'm kind of like you in that respect that I like to learn something new. I like to learn about these religions. Now, I grew up in a household that would not be considered religious at all. My mother was a half-breed Native American, and my father grew up in a Methodist church, and basically there was no religious affiliation going on in my house. We did not attend any churches. So I'd like to think that I was able to get an objective view of the religious people that were around me. For instance, the children and how it affected them, and even the adults, how they behaved. I'd like to think it gave me an objective look. Whether it did or didn't, who really knows? Everybody is a product of their environment and what happens to them. They're a product of their life. So even though I like to look at things objectively, I try very hard to put aside my biases. But research is fun. But we need fun things to do. I mean, people, if they're to just focus on all this evil and wickedness in the world and only focus on the wickedness aspect, then it's doom and gloom, because it's everywhere. Wickedness is permeated everywhere. If you really, really want to look, what people will discover is every single major religion is permeated with what it is they say is bad and evil and wrong. They're permeated with it. Now, when I say a religion, I'm gonna try to focus on the three major religions that come out of Abraham, the story of Abraham, the so-called Abrahamic seed of Isaac and Jacob. Okay, that's what I have in mind when I think the three major religions. I realize there are other ones, but that's kind of what my major focus is on. Now, it's the Sikhism is, I don't know if it's part of any of those, but what I'd like to add is the way I see it is, and you had mentioned it yourself, is the indoctrination process that people go through in religions, where one religion really doesn't want you to inspect the other religion objectively. They only want you to inspect that other religion based on the subjective material supplied to you by the organization or the people that indoctrinated you. They want to narrate the story for you. And I do believe that that is because once you really look deep into these major religions, they have something similar. There's a similar storyline there. And I like to sum it up as magic, hypnosis, psychology, and stereotyping. Religions, especially the major three, because I've read in the Bible and enough to know that the Bible is set up in a manner to stereotype people. And once you stereotype, that's a form of division, then people can be conquered. And it was all about conquering peoples in the Bible and religion in a whole. Because when it comes right down to it, it's who's going to be in charge. Because the way I see it, them all three major Abrahamic religions are all controlled by one entity. That entity is best described as Satan. And the reason I use the name Satan, not because of the devilish, with the spear or pitchfork, not because of that cartoon type character, but there is something that Satan represents that a lot of people don't talk about a whole lot, and that's corruption. Satan is the epitome of corruption. The same as Yeshua HaMashiach, also known as Jesus Christ, is the epitome of self-sacrifice. Now, if we take things in that basic realm, we should be able to ascertain what should be going on, but also what has gone on. Now, we'll take Satan again, for example. Corruption. We know everything's corrupt. Every single thing is corrupted. Governments are corrupt. Religions are corrupt. Businesses are corrupt. People are corrupt. The physical man is corrupted. Our world, our earth is corrupted. And the corruption that is in our earth and in our being is what I'm identifying as Satan. And that is why we are unable to live forever as human beings on the earth that we reside in now. And it's that corruption that deteriorates our bodies. No matter what we do, no matter what medications we use, no matter what kind of foods we eat, no matter how careful we are, we only have a limited lifespan because of that corruption, that deterioration. Now, we also have cancer that comes in, and that's a corruption within our very cells. Cancer. And cancer mimics a cell so that it can be transported all around in the body and establish these tumors or cysts or whatever it is that the doctors are calling them nowadays, but they're destructive, they're painful, and the treatment is equally destructive, painful, sickening. It's basic poison being put through people's bodies to deal with this cancer. But because of corruption itself, this medical problem that people have known as cancer has never been so-called cured or never come up with a effective manner outside of this poisoning of a person and making them sick. It's the medical establishment has not come up with, at least not in the United States, in any major fashion to deal with this. Now, my personal opinion is because whenever we try to deal with, as a society, a problem, just like with the religion, try to deal with the problem, it points us in a direction to the next problem, and then to the next problem, and eventually it comes full circle. So, for instance, where are these cancers coming from? For all intents and purposes, even in the United States of America that likes to think that there's such a clean, healthy, safe environment, it comes from the environment, man-made environment. It comes through pollution, poisoning. It comes through the tampering of our food. It comes through our medicines, especially our vaccinations. But the status quo and the system in place doesn't want to stop any of what they're doing. So they just continually build upon that wickedness, that corruption, and they build another layer of corruption higher, and another layer of corruption higher, and another layer of corruption higher, until they got this giant layer of corruption. Is that ever going to solve the problem? Well, in the point of cancer, it hasn't. It's become an economy. Cancer is an economy. It's an economy. It's a money maker. It's a huge money maker. Even people that should know better, basically sacrifice their lives for their establishment, which was their livelihood. and which may be the livelihood for their children because they're involved in the medical establishment. Or maybe they're involved in a business that's a high polluting business. They don't want that stopped. They will by all means do everything possible that they can to influence politics, to create laws and rules that work for them, to keep the money flowing. Greed. We're talking about institutions and people that have as much money as any institution or person possibly needs for the rest of eternity. There are some people out there, these higher level people on that big tall hat of ball at the top, that ball, the ball, the ball, the ball on the top of that hat, okay, those people have control over so much. They can't possibly say, gee, I got to make sure that my family's taken care of when I go. I got to make sure that my grandchildren are taken care of. My great-grandchildren are taken care of. My great-great-great-grandchildren are taken care of. My great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are taken care of. That's not even in the equation anymore, these people. They're just greedy. Now, if you look, for example, at the Rothschild family, and I'm going to point specifically at the Rothschild family, well, they brought that on themselves. And they brought them on themselves back in 1934. There's a black and white movie named The House of Rothschild. And it was a propaganda film. Now, I believe that the Rothschilds didn't even have a clue as to what they were showing the public, what their family is really like. They were showing how greedy and nasty that their family really was, and they thought they were justified. They thought people would gather up with them and have empathy with them and say, well, of course they're behaving that way. Of course they are. You would too. But actually they were making a propaganda film to try to shape you to be just as greedy as them. It didn't really work in that respect because it showed people what they are all about, what they came from. And if you have the time, you ought to look at that old black and white movie. You'll probably find out that, and remember that you've seen it before. I did. I remember. I said, oh yeah, I've seen this before. I've seen that before. But that's the family. That's the number one major greedy, manipulative, satanic, corrupted family. See, they finance corruption. See, that's why I say they're the ball on the top of the ball hat. The ball hat. That's them. That's them. Because they're the ones that send that corruption out into the world. And if you want to look at it in a biblical sense, they're the ones riding the beast. They're the mother of all prostitutes. The madam, the mother, the one who collects the money, who gets the profit out of all the wickedness, out of all the greed, out of all the evil in the world. That's what that represents. That's the symbolism there. And that's the one major family. There are other families, there are other families, but they're the easiest one to identify. They're the ones who started the nation of Israel. They're the ones who left behind numbers upon numbers of businesses for Hitler to use. They financed him, and it's believed that they financed him with cash also. But even without the cash, they financed him by leaving all these businesses for him, and they left the country. No Rothschilds got scooped up in that World War II thing. And for all intents and purposes, Hitler's great-grandmother gave birth to a Rothschild. She was a maid at one of the Rothschilds' mansions, and whether it be through rape or through an affair, for it is really believed that she bore Rothschild, and Adolf Hitler's real name should have been Adolf Rothschild. And there's lots of things that people can look at, but I'm kind of getting off point here. I just want to make a video response.